Welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into the fascinating history of Liberia, a country with a past as rich and complex as a plate of jollof rice after a 3-day family reunion. And believe me, you do not want to miss this family reunion. We're talking about the presidents, the big kahunas, the head honchos who've steered Liberia through thick and thin. From the founding fathers who fought for independence to the leaders who navigated civil wars and economic roller coasters, we'll unpack it all. Because Liberia's story, my friends, is not just about one person, it's a tapestry woven together by the actions and decisions of all these presidents. So buckle up, grab your thinking caps, and maybe a snack or two, because we're about to embark on a wild ride through Liberia's presidential history. First up, we have the big cheese himself, the OG Liberian, President number 1, Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Imagine being the first president of a brand new country. The pressure. It's like being the first person to try and hail a ride from a brand new app. You just don't know what you're going to get. But Roberts, he handled it like a champ. This guy was instrumental in securing Liberia's independence. I'm talking negotiating treaties, drafting constitutions, you name it. He was like the Swiss Army knife of nation building. And get this, he wasn't even born in Liberia. Born in Virginia in the US, he was part of a wave of free black people who emigrated to Liberia. Talk about a leap of faith. But Roberts, he saw an opportunity to create a nation where black people could thrive, free from the shackles of oppression, and he went for it, full steam ahead. He laid the foundation for a nation, and that, my friends, is no small feat. Next up, we've got Stephen Allen Benson, the second president of Liberia. Now, Benson was all about expanding Liberia's horizons, both literally and figuratively. He was like that friend who's always up for trying a new restaurant, exploring a new part of town. Under his leadership, Liberia grew, inking deals with indigenous leaders and expanding its territory. But Benson wasn't just about grabbing land. He was also a big advocate for unity. He believed in bringing indigenous Liberians into the fold, giving them a seat at the table, which, let's be honest, was pretty progressive for the time. He knew that a nation divided couldn't stand, especially one as young and fragile as Liberia. So he pushed for integration, for a Liberia where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel like they belonged. And let's not forget his focus on agriculture and trade. This wasn't just about boosting the economy, it was about building a nation that could stand on its own 2 feet. He understood that true independence meant being self-sufficient, not relying on handouts from other countries. Now let's talk about Daniel Bashiel Warner, the third president of Liberia. This guy was all about bringing people together. He was like the human equivalent of a big pot of Liberian peanut soup. Warm, comforting, and bringing everyone to the table. Warner understood that for Liberia to truly succeed, it needed to be united. He saw the divisions within society, the tensions simmering beneath the surface, and he knew that he needed to bridge those gaps. So he made it his mission to foster a sense of national unity, encouraging Liberians to see past their differences and work together for the common good. And speaking of bringing people together, Warner also established the first national currency, the Liberian dollar. Talk about a unifying force. Before that, it was a whole hodgepodge of different currencies floating around, which, let's be honest, is about as much fun as trying to pay for groceries with monopoly money. But the Liberian dollar, that was a game changer. It gave people a sense of shared identity, a common ground on which to build their economy. It was a symbol of their independence, their self-sufficiency, and their unity. Our next president, James Spriggs Payne, was a man ahead of his time. This was a guy who looked at the world and saw the injustices, the things that needed fixing. He was like the original social justice warrior, except instead of tweeting about it, he actually did something about it. One of his biggest passions? Abolishing the transatlantic slave trade. This was a man who understood the horrors of slavery, the cruelty and inhumanity of it all. He knew that as long as this barbaric practice continued, true freedom and equality would remain elusive, so he used his platform to speak out against it, to rally international support for its abolition. But Paine's vision wasn't limited to ending slavery. He also wanted to heal the divisions within Liberian society. He understood that the legacy of slavery, of colonialism, had left deep scars on the nation's psyche. So he worked tirelessly to improve relations with indigenous communities, to create a more just and equitable society for all Liberians. Now let's talk about Edward James Roy, a man who dreamed big and wasn't afraid to shake things up. He was like the Elon Musk of 19th century Liberia, except instead of electric cars and spaceships, he was all about modernizing Liberia's economy and infrastructure. Roy, he had this grand vision for Liberia. He saw its potential, its untapped resources, and he was determined to turn it into a modern, thriving nation. He wanted to build roads, ports, schools, hospitals, all the things that would put Liberia on the map, not just as an independent nation but as a force to be reckoned with. But Roy's ambition sometimes got him into hot water. He negotiated a controversial loan from Britain which, while well-intentioned, ended up plunging Liberia into debt and sparking political turmoil. It's a bit like that time you decided to remodel your bathroom, thinking it would be a quick, budget-friendly project only to find yourself knee-deep in plumbing problems and cost overruns. After the roller coaster ride of Roy's presidency, Liberia needed someone to steady the ship, to bring some calm to the chaos. Enter James Skivering Smith, a man known for his level-headedness and diplomacy. He was like the calming presence you need after a wild night out, the friend who reminds you to drink some water and get some sleep. Smith wasn't interested in grand schemes or radical reforms. He was a pragmatist, focused on the here and now, on addressing the most pressing issues facing Liberia. His priority was to restore order, to heal the divisions that had emerged during Roy's tumultuous presidency. And you know what? Sometimes that's exactly what a country needs, not a revolutionary but a steady hand, a leader who can bring people together and guide them through a crisis. Smith may not have been the flashiest president, but he played a crucial role in holding Liberia together during a turbulent period. Our next president, Anthony W. Gardner, was a man who understood that a nation, like a house, needs strong foundations to stand the test of time. He was all about strengthening Liberia's territorial claims, making sure those borders were set in stone, or at least in treaties. But Gardner's vision went beyond just securing Liberia's physical boundaries. He also wanted to build bridges with the outside world, to establish strong relationships with European powers. He knew that Liberia, as a young nation, couldn't afford to be isolated. It needed allies, trading partners, and a place on the world stage. And let's not forget his focus on infrastructure. Gardner understood that for Liberia to thrive, it needed roads, schools, hospitals, all the things that connect people and facilitate progress. He was a builder in the truest sense of the word, laying the groundwork for a more prosperous and connected Liberia. Now, let's be real, Alfred F. Russell's presidency was a bit like that one season of your favorite TV show that everyone tries to forget ever happened. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly groundbreaking either. Russell's time in office was short, a bit of a blip in the grand scheme of things. He wasn't elected to enact sweeping reforms or lead Liberia on some bold new adventure. His job was simply to hold the fort, to keep the ship afloat until the next captain took the helm. But hey, even placeholders have their purpose. Get ready to make some noise for Hillary R.W. Johnson, because this guy, he made history. Why? Because he was the first native-born president of Liberia. That's right, the first leader to truly call Liberia his own, born and bred. It's like that moment when your favorite underdog team finally wins the championship. You can't help but feel a surge of pride, of hope, of knowing that anything is possible. And that's what Johnson's presidency represented for many Liberians. A new era, a chance to forge their own destiny, led by one of their own. But Johnson wasn't just about symbolism. This guy was a pragmatist, focused on delivering tangible results for his people. He poured his energy into economic development, knowing that a strong economy was the key to lifting people out of poverty and securing Liberia's future. Now let's talk about Joseph James Cheeseman, a man who understood the value of a dollar, or a Liberian dollar to be precise. This guy was all about fiscal responsibility. He was like the friend who always reminds you to check your bank balance before ordering another round of drinks. Cheeseman inherited an economy that was, shall we say, a little worse for wear. So he rolled up his sleeves and got to work, cutting unnecessary spending and trying to balance the books. He knew that for Liberia to prosper, it needed a solid financial foundation. But Cheeseman wasn't all about austerity. He also understood the importance of investing in Liberia's future. He championed education and healthcare initiatives, knowing that a healthy and educated population was essential for long-term growth. Next up we have William D. Coleman, a man who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of international diplomacy. Picture this. It's the late 19th century. European powers are carving up Africa like a birthday cake, and there's little Liberia trying to maintain its independence amidst all the chaos. Talk about a high-pressure situation. But Coleman, he handled it like a boss. He was a master negotiator, a smooth talker who could charm a snake out of a tree. He understood that Liberia couldn't afford to make enemies, so he played the diplomatic game with skill and finesse. But Coleman wasn't just about preserving the status quo. He also understood that for Liberia to thrive, it needed to develop its economy. He pushed for economic reforms, knowing that financial independence was essential for true sovereignty. Now let's talk about Garretson W. Gibson, a man who stepped into the presidency at a time when Liberia needed a little bit of TLC. The country was facing internal conflicts, economic woes, and the ever-present threat of European encroachment. It was enough to make anyone reach for the stress ball. But Gibson, he wasn't fazed. He was a unifier, a man who believed in the power of dialogue and compromise. He understood that a house divided against itself cannot stand, so he made it his mission to heal the divisions within Liberia. Gibson knew that a strong economy was crucial for national unity and stability. So he focused on stabilizing the economy, implementing policies designed to promote growth and create opportunities for all Liberians. Our next president, Arthur Barkley, was a man who believed in constant improvement. He was like that friend who's always rearranging their furniture, trying to find the perfect layout. For Barkley, Liberia was a work in progress, and he was determined to make it the best it could be. Barkley was a firm believer in good governance. He knew that for Liberia to prosper, it needed efficient institutions, a fair and transparent legal system, and a government that was accountable to its people. So he set about reforming the administration, streamlining bureaucracy, and tackling corruption. But Barkley wasn't just focused on internal matters. He also understood the importance of Liberia's place in the world. Next up we have Daniel E. Howard, a man who led Liberia through one of the most tumultuous periods in human history, World War I. Imagine being president of a small nation while the rest of the world is engulfed in a global conflict. Talk about a tightrope walk. But Howard, he managed to keep Liberia neutral. It wasn't easy, mind you. There were pressures from all sides, alliances being tested, and the ever-present threat of being drawn into the conflict. But Howard, he stuck to his guns, navigating the diplomatic minefield with the grace of a gazelle and the wisdom of an owl. He knew that Liberia's best interests lay in staying out of the fray, in focusing on its own development and stability. Now, let's talk about Charles D.B. King, a man whose presidency started with promise but ended in a cloud of controversy. You see, King was a bit like that friend who throws a great party, everyone's having a good time, the music's pumping, and then boom, they spill red wine all over the white carpet. King, he came into office with big plans. He secured a loan from the United States to help stabilize the economy, which, on paper, sounded like a good idea. I mean, Who doesn't love a little financial assistance, right? He even represented Liberia at the League of Nations, rubbing shoulders with world leaders trying to put Liberia on the map. But then came the Fernando Po scandal, allegations of forced labor and human rights abuses, and suddenly, King's presidency went from a party to a full-blown crisis. Next up we have Edwin Barclay, a man who had the unenviable task of leading Liberia through the storm that was World War II. Imagine being president of a small nation while the world is once again engulfed in conflict. It's like trying to bake a cake during a hurricane with the oven on fire and you've run out of sugar. But Barclay, he faced the challenges head-on. He knew that Liberia, despite its size, couldn't afford to be a bystander in the fight against fascism. So he strengthened ties with the United States, aligning Liberia with the Allied forces. But Barclay's focus wasn't solely on the war effort. He also understood that Liberia faced its own internal challenges, divisions that needed healing, and a nation that needed to be united in the face of global uncertainty. Hold on to your hats, folks, because we're about to talk about William V.S. Tubman, the man who held the Liberian presidency longer than anyone else, over 27 years. That's longer than some people have been alive watching this video. Tubman was a towering figure in Liberian history, a man who left an undeniable mark on the nation. He was like that guest who comes over for dinner and ends up staying for a week, rearranging your furniture and giving you unsolicited life advice. He implemented the open-door policy, which was like Liberia rolling out the red carpet for foreign investment. And invest they did. Companies came knocking, bringing with them jobs, infrastructure, and a much-needed economic boost. But Tubman's legacy is complex. While he oversaw significant economic growth, his critics argue that the benefits weren't evenly distributed, with many Liberians, particularly those in rural areas, left behind. Our next president, William R. Tolbert Jr., was a man who believed in challenging the status quo. He was like that friend who always orders the most adventurous dish on the menu, the one with ingredients you can't even pronounce. Tolbert came into office with a burning desire to reform Liberia, to address the social and economic inequalities that had plagued the nation for far too long. He was a champion of the marginalized, a voice for the voiceless. He also believed in a united Africa, a continent that could stand tall on the world stage. He served as chairman of the Organization of African Unity, using his platform to advocate for African solidarity and self-reliance. But Tolbert's ambitious agenda, his willingness to shake things up, ultimately led to his downfall. In 1980 he was overthrown and assassinated in a military coup, a tragic end to a presidency filled with both promise and turmoil. Now, let's talk about Samuel K. Doe, a man whose story is a cautionary tale of power, ambition, and the corrupting influence of both. Doe came to power in a blaze of glory, a young, charismatic soldier who promised to sweep away the old order and usher in a new era for Liberia. And at first it seemed like he might actually pull it off. Doe was immensely popular, particularly amongst indigenous Liberians who saw him as a symbol of their own empowerment. He implemented reforms, cracked down on corruption, or at least the corruption of his predecessors, and promised a brighter future for all. But Doe's rule took a dark turn. He became increasingly authoritarian, silencing dissent, consolidating power, and amassing a fortune for himself and his cronies. The hope that had accompanied his rise to power slowly morphed into fear and resentment. Buckle up, folks, because we're about to delve into the tumultuous reign of Charles Taylor, a man whose name is synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in Liberian history, the First Liberian Civil War. Taylor, a former warlord with a penchant for violence and a silver tongue for propaganda, emerged from the chaos of the 1980 coup as a powerful force. He promised to liberate Liberia from Doe's oppressive regime, but his methods were as brutal as the dictator he sought to overthrow. The civil war that followed was a descent into madness, a maelstrom of violence, ethnic cleansing, and unimaginable cruelty. Child soldiers, amputations, and the use of rape as a weapon of war became tragically commonplace. Taylor eventually emerged victorious, assuming the presidency in 1997. But his rule was far from peaceful. He continued to rule with an iron fist, accused of corruption, human rights abuses, and fueling conflicts in neighboring countries. After years of conflict and bloodshed, Liberia found itself at a crossroads. Charles Taylor, facing mounting international pressure and a renewed rebel offensive, was on his way out. Stepping into the void was Moses Blah, a man tasked with the unenviable job of guiding Liberia through a fragile transition. Blah's presidency was short-lived, a mere 2 months sandwiched between the fall of Taylor and the establishment of a transitional government. His role was less about enacting sweeping reforms, and more about keeping the ship afloat, preventing Liberia from capsizing entirely. He played a key role in negotiating a ceasefire between the warring factions, paving the way for the deployment of UN peacekeepers, and the eventual establishment of a transitional government. Get ready to be inspired, folks, because we're about to talk about Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a woman who shattered glass ceilings and made history as Africa's first female elected head of state. Sirleaf, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and a fierce advocate for democracy and human rights, inherited a nation shattered by years of conflict. The economy was in ruins, infrastructure lay in tatters, and the social fabric had been torn apart by violence and mistrust. But Sirleaf, undeterred, rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She spearheaded a massive reconstruction effort, rebuilding roads, schools, hospitals, and the institutions of government. She negotiated debt relief, attracting foreign investment, and implemented economic reforms aimed at putting Liberia on the path to sustainable growth. But perhaps her most significant achievement was fostering peace and reconciliation. She understood that true peace went beyond silencing the guns, that it required healing the wounds of the past and building a society where justice and forgiveness could prevail. Our next president needs no introduction, especially if you're a fan of the beautiful game. George Weah, a global football icon, traded the roar of the stadium for the halls of power when he was elected president in 2017. Weah's victory was seen by many as a new chapter for Liberia, a chance for a fresh start after years of conflict and instability. He promised to use his international fame to attract investment, to create jobs, and to improve the lives of ordinary Liberians. He focused on education, infrastructure development, and economic reforms, aiming to tackle the deep-rooted poverty and inequality that plagued Liberia. He also championed youth empowerment, recognizing the potential of Liberia's young population. In 2017, the world watched as George Weah, one of the greatest footballers of all time, took on a new challenge, leading his nation as president. But this wasn't a game with a guaranteed win. Weah inherited a country still healing from years of conflict and grappling with poverty. Undeterred, he laced up his metaphorical boots and got to work, focusing on education, healthcare, and tackling Liberia's economic woes. He knew that for Liberia to truly rise, it needed a strong foundation, a level playing field where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. He traveled the world, not to score goals this time, but to score investments, to convince the international community that Liberia was open for business, that it was ready to reclaim its place on the global stage. So there you have it, folks, a whirlwind tour through Liberia's presidential history. From the founding fathers to the football stars, we've seen it all. The triumphs, the tragedies, the scandals, and the moments that redefined a nation. Liberia's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of hope, and the unwavering belief in a brighter future. It's a story that's still being written, a journey that continues to unfold with each passing day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more historical insights. See you next time.